the formulation of the questions, let alone the formulation of the answers, is situated. And therefore, both methodologically and epistemologically, it was very important for me to state my own where my own situated gaze has been. And I mean, I think, again, it was mentioned earlier in the day, I by no means reduce social locations, identifications, and normative values, but I do feel that they affect and are affected by such endeavor as writing the book. And I felt that, in a way, by stating how I came to be involved in issues of nationalism and issue of gender relation, in issues of religion, racism, cosmopolitanism, and so on, it will provide the critical reader with more tools in order to assess and appreciate what I'm writing. So, and in terms of my own, of course, I grew up, as mentioned, in Israel, a daughter of ardent labor Zionists in the heart of the Zionist establishment, and then through, somebody mentioned Ayn Rand, which suddenly gave me a permission not to follow the collective. I had to become right-wing libertarian before I became left-wing libertarian. And my father was an ardent secularist, a son of a rabbi, of line of rabbis, who rebelled. And paradoxically, because the Germans occupied Lithuania in First World War, they forced secular education on everyone. So he was allowed, was exposed to other education. This is why the whole issues of faith schools has been so important, also for me, as part of the agenda of Women Against Fundamentalism. And then through meeting Palestinians, the 48 women in Israel, and some, one or two, even before university, where I met the Avishai when he was just about still a communist, but also as a teenager, I met some. And then in the military, you know, in Israel, girls also go to the military unless they are religious, unless they are pregnant, unless they are married. And I was supposed to be sent to the officers' course because I became from a good middle-class patriotic home. And for the couple of months until the next course will start, they sent me to a very privileged place in Tel Aviv, to the office of the military governor. And in the first day that my boss, and you even didn't have to wear uniforms, it was such a privilege, he asked me, by the way, what do you think about the military government of Israeli Arabs? And in my all innocence of 18 years old, I looked at him and I said, you know, I don't think it's very just. Why do you have to govern military, all of them? Why not only those whom you think are spies or enemies of the state? This was the start of a whole month of attempting to educate me politically and me becoming more and more convinced that I was right. And also security investigation, finding that I had a boyfriend who was from a Palestinian village and another one who was and a girlfriend who was communist. And I got a low security rank and was sent as a private to be a typist in the garage, where I was exposed to a very blatant sexism, and also I was the only one who finished high school. I was almost the only one who was Ashkenazi rather than Mizrahi. So in a way, my all situated gaze of the Israeli society kind of changed. And my process of politicization that eventually made me anti-Zionist, anti-racist, anti-sexist, etc., has begun. Yeah.
I think that's very convincing, and also tells us why you're interested in narratives as well. But just one little thing I want to pick up from there, because you mentioned just now there's no God's eye view, and indeed you cite Donna Haraway at more than one point, talking about that there's no view from nowhere. So I was a little surprised that you apologised for the limitations of your perspective. What do you mean by that? Can you have it both ways, that there is nothing but perspective and you do the best you can around that, and that you apologise because your perspective is limited?
Well, maybe I apologize, that's part, you feel guilty, you apologize. I mean, it is because when you try to write the most comprehensive thing that you can, and you are very conscious of the limitations of what you can, you feel bad. I mean, we all want to be gods, don't we? I mean, we want to be perfect. No, we don't really want to be gods. I agree. I can just see somebody quoting.
Okay. There are also, I'm going to come back to the main messages of the book in a moment, but there are also some indications, I think, of how one, in your view, should do academic work. Some of them are implicit. One is that this book is very intertextual with gender and nation. You sometimes cite things that you say there and think about how you've moved on. You also say that you started thinking about this book, even though not in the form it eventually took, the moment you stopped writing Gender and Nation, and we know that you find difficulty in stopping, so maybe you just close one book and begin another. So I mean, I think that, though, the non-flippant point about that is that maybe academic work linked with activism requires that one's continually thinking and committing words to paper, which gives it a certain fixity, but actually also helps one to work things out. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that you talk about academic work really as dialogical. And it's been mentioned several times today how many collaborators that you've had, successful collaborators who've lasted over time, many of whom are in the audience, and so that they're still friends. Because we all know academic collaborations where you collaborate for one really good project, but then you don't really want to see the person ever again. So you don't seem to have done that. So that's the other thing, the dialogical thing. As being sort of really important. And then I think a third thing that you talk about is around ethics. And I wonder if you could take us a little bit further into your thinking about ethics in relation to the politics of belonging and academic work.
Well, first of all, in terms of, each time when I finish writing a book, and this has started with my MA dissertation, I think, let alone the PhD dissertation, I swore I'm never going to write a book again. I swore the same thing now when I finished the book. And in a way, each book become more comprehensive and become more impossible and a torture to write. And yet there is this kind of impulse, this kind of feeling that you must write it. And I don't know why, but one of the interesting things with virtually all my academic friends is that, and not just academic friends, Gal, my son, is a great example. I mean, that the real work is writing. We can teach, we can do administration, we can do housework, we can do a million of things, and this is not work. Although as feminists, we will talk about housework as work and iPad, but the real work is writing. I haven't done any work today. I've been 12 hours in the office, but I haven't done any work today. And it's not idiosyncratic. We are all like this. But why is a subject that I invite people to write, to make a research on, because I haven't a clue why this have become like that. But also because life is a process, work is a process, activism is a process. So there is an ongoing internal dialogue, not only external dialogue. And whenever you feel that you have certain kind of insight idea, and someone said, oh, I must put it down, I must develop it, I must work on it, there is a whole... So in some way, there isn't this kind of internal rest. I finished. One of the things I was absolutely amazed, I've been a visiting professor in Sweden in the last couple of years. They go to office there 5 days a week, early in the morning until 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. Then they go home and they stop working. They stop thinking about work. And this is something that I think in Britain, in the United States, in the Israel, most of the people that I know, it's absolutely unthinkable. So I envy them in many ways, but this is definitely not me. Now, in terms of the dialogue, I'm very, very conscious, and I've also have written about it, especially in relation to conception of subjectivity and identity, but of course, and belonging, about the dialogue, also the situated knowledge and situated imagination, the work I've done with Marcel. It's not, though, the dialogue is not only with those that I've been working with. And I've been very, very fortunate. As you said, I've been absolutely lucky and fortunate with all the friends who either were friends before we started work together, or we ended up as friends after work together. I haven't, although there were a lot of difficult moments during the process, I remained friends with everybody that I work with. And as you say, many of them are here. Others, sent me messages of apologies they couldn't be here, but they're still friends. So, although, of course, the formulation is of mine, and I've been moving throughout my life between the need to write my own thing and the need to work with others, because I found both teaching and working with others in terms of writing and so on is the fastest and the best ways of learning, because this is what force you to learn, to grow, to also, like Patricia Hill-Collins said, there isn't, that we can only get approximate to the truth. We can never reach the truth. And we approximate the truth the wider the dialogue from different positioning and so on. And therefore, collaborative work with particular individuals or with a group of people has always been tremendously exciting, insightful, and I found it really rewarding, although by no means the only way I feel compelled to work. Yeah.
And the ethics question?
The ethics question, what about the ethics question that you want ethics.
Well, you devote a section to thinking about ethics around politics of belonging. And I was also interested in the ethics of your working practices, particularly since you're so politically engaged. So,
well, I think in terms of the practice of work, your previous question about is this a hint? About stating my own location and situated gaze has been absolutely basic in terms of ethics of writing. As I think was mentioned throughout the day, both with my postgraduate students and also with writing, I think this is a process that obviously mutual respect, what politically there's transversal politics, the words, is integral part of it. And in terms of ethics, as again was mentioned through the other day, the differentiation between social locations, identifications, and political values is quite important to the way I construct belonging and the politics of belonging. And normative and political values is where the realm of the politics of belonging begin, because I differentiate very clearly between belonging and politics of belonging.
Okay. What I want to do, because time's pressing on, is to deal with a few issues that you addressed. Some of them have come up already, but I'll start with perhaps a relatively tiny one, but a point at which I was perhaps jarred a bit in reading the book, because I personally have always disliked the term autochthonous, however one pronounces it, which I've encountered in the Netherlands, and which it seems to me serves to exclude others from the possibility of belonging to the nation, so that it's often used in a way that's relatively similar to indigenous. And so I was a bit surprised that you liked it, you used it and liked it. And if I just can quote a bit, can I?
But I liked it not because I like autochthony, but because I consider autochthony as a hegemonic form of racism today.
Yeah, but
I differentiate it, and for the reasons I can explain, from the notion of indigenousness. And I can, but if you want to go ahead.
No, why don't you? People can read it themselves.
Originally, I was not using autochthony. I never heard about the word autochthony. And I was talking only about indigenous politics, which I saw as very much as double-edged. Because on the one hand, land rights and political rights and other forms of human rights of indigenous people have been a subject matter of a lot of political campaigns that I've been part of, starting from, the rights of the Palestinians, confiscation of Palestinian lands, and then when I was in Australia, the land rights of the Aboriginals, and of course when I kind of developed the whole notion of settler societies, I did it in collaboration with Davis, she's a Canadian that I met in Australia, and I felt that I finally understand a lot of the specificities of the Israel-Palestine issue. She felt she finally understood some of the specificities of the Canadian issues when we both kind of looked at the Australian case, and then we collaborated on developing a kind of a theoretical introduction problematic about intersectional approach to settler societies, and took 10 case studies, from which is Palestine, United States, Canada, Australia, but also Algeria, South Africa were part of it. So in recent years, there have been the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Indigenous People, and I celebrate that. And yet, I also were very much occupied with sense of discomfort, even in relation to these struggles. For example, in Australia, there were some years that all the graduates of anthropology were employed by particular land councils that tried to prove that particular kinship, Aboriginal kinship groups were the real indigenous people of this particular place, and of course they are the ones who should benefit from the mineral rights of this land. And other Aboriginal groups who ended up there because they were displaced from other parts of Australia where private lands or land drove them away, and do not really belong and should not share. So it was this combination of tribalism and neoliberalism kind of thing. In North America, they even used DNA blood tests comparison with burial areas in order to show who belong and who not among them. And I felt that this kind of exclusive claim, not even among different kinship groups, but also this kind of claiming this place belonged to us, and therefore all the other people have to go away. Doesn't matter that their families have been living there for 200-300 years, doesn't matter how. And when I came first to Australia, it was very interesting, because when the Aboriginal women started to talk about imposing society, then you know, Irish woman came and said, we are not imposed, we were discriminated against. And the Jewish woman said, we are not imposed, we are discriminated. And then the English one came and said, but my forefathers came here as convicts. They're not the one. So I thought, oh, beyond dichotomies. Our original title on the Settler Society was supposed to be Beyond Dichotomy. So, of course, this whole issue, and of course in the Zionist conflict, it's, again, not just a question of claim of 2,000 years and so on, but, you know, my parents were the only one who survived from all their families. They were not murdered by the Nazis because, by chance, they, as Zionists, left Lithuania before Second World War, and by chance the Nazis were stopped before they conquered Palestine. So there is a lot kind of chances, but the story is complex. So of course this is in itself was problematic. But now we see the British National Party and other similar groupings in Europe applying to the same UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People to say we are the indigenous people in England and therefore the other people have no right, they have to be deported and so on. So this is how I started. Then when the first draft of the book was sent to readers, both readers were very indignant. They came from, I suppose, from countries either Australia or Canada or United States, and they were very much active in the rights of indigenous people. So they felt that there is a big problem about me kind of talking indigenous people with this disrespect or whatever. This is about that time I happened to read Peter Gashier's book about autochthony. And although the translation of the UN Declaration of Indigenous People to French translates indigenous to autochthone, in many African countries and in the Netherlands and in other places, autochthone became the word to those who really belong, and it became where there is tribal and ethnic conflict within Africa, when there is the Breivik kind of anti-immigration. The English Defence League, they still can use origin, color, religion, culture as signifiers of boundaries, but this is about spatial racism. We belong, you do not belong, and gang warfare among migrants. I remember the last time I taught sociology of religion in Greenwich, some of my black students who came from Hackney talked about, in the same way that white working class from Hackney talked about them 15, 20 years ago, they talked about the Kurdish refugees in Hackney. So, as Gashier said, autochthony is much more plastic, empty notion. And therefore, I thought that it is apt to, not only to use it in the book, but have been working and developing it since.
Okay. Well, your analysis is great, but I'll wait to see how you develop using the term.
Okay.
We've only got 5 minutes remaining, and there are lots of things that I was going to ask about, but many of those have come up already today and had quite a lot of airing, and we'll have more. I want to ask, though, about transversal politics, which has come up, and Nadia, for example, said that one of the things that showed how dynamic your work is and how much you think and are prepared to move is that you've shifted your thinking about transversal politics. And it seems to me that one of the things that's happened is that you're much more lukewarm to it here than you were in Gender and Nation.
It's not a question of lukewarm here. I use it in a much more limited way here,
Yeah.
but very particular way, because what has happened is that when I first got exposed to the notion of transversal politics and developed it, I thought that we found the answer to the alternative politics to identity politics, which we were all searching for. I don't have time to go to explain what is transversal politics, but since then, thinking about it more, working, and this workshop that Nadia was talking about that I called, organized in Cyprus about some issues in feminist movement, it also included the NGOization and professionalization, but also the problem that transversal politics shared with other form of feminist politics, and wider than that, all the new social movements, that they never found a positive solution to the problem of decision-making mechanism. They rebelled, and rightly so, against the hierarchical, exclusionary type of decision-making mechanism in the old left. The consensus politics, however, that produced as an alternative, not only proved itself to be very inefficient as a mechanism of decision-making, but also, rather than democratic, as opaque and non-transparent, because it did not cancel power relations within the group, but it made it invisible. Very often it's the people who stay till the end of the meeting at 4 o'clock in the morning who would make actually the decision. Other people were more articulate, and therefore others became intimidated by them. But the consensus is as if it's homogeneous and all the group seem the same. And therefore, I don't agree with it. Transversal politics makes this more blatant because it is very clear that the people who are involved in the dialogue across borders and boundaries are not representatives of the groups, as in identity politics that conflate positioning, identifications, and values, and individual and group. So in a way, even the excuse for that we speak in kind of the voice of our group is not there. We're only advocates. And of course, part of it, which is good, that very often the need for action is not the same for different participants in the dialogue. What is there is the issue of shared values. And I think I said earlier during the day that the ethics of care means that we have to care about everybody. But in the chapter about this, I described the debate between Levinas and Buber, because Buber talked about the ideal relationship of I-you rather than, or I-thou, rather than I-it. And Levinas said, no, this assumes mutuality, and caring should not be based on mutuality, because the mutuality is like mutual interest, almost of trading. You are good to me, I'm good to you. And what I say is that the mutuality of transversal politics is not about interest, but about trust. Therefore, long-term solidarity and political alliance can be when you trust, and you trust when you share values, even if you come from different locations, from different collectivities, from different identifications. But caring, you can do with everyone. Now, epistemologically, this kind of dialogue is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient for solidarity. And the dialogue can happen also among those who do not share values. And epistemologically, dialogue is always very important. Transversal politics limit the boundaries of the dialogue to those who share values. So it's absolutely vital, but it cannot be the end. I mean, we need to find some other ways in order to do efficient political action. And look now what is happening all over the world, which is so wonderful in so many ways, and yet it hasn't managed to develop alternative political structures and decision-making mechanisms that will sustain themselves long-term and can defeat those who are actually, they are rebelling against. So this feeling of helplessness, of limits, weakness, I have come to look at transversal politics. So anybody with a good idea, please let me know.
I think that's a good place for our conversation to stop. Just to say that the book is it's scholarly, it's highly engaged and engaging, so it's not a turgid read at all, and that Nira manages to end it on a tentative note of hope, and once again, as in Gender and Nation, with dancing, which is one of her passions. But I think...
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Anne. I just... Okay, we're not quite over in this session because I think people would feel very cheated indeed if they didn't have an opportunity to address some questions to Nira. But if it's okay with you, because we're approaching the end of what's been quite a long day, and people want to get their hands on the book and possibly some refreshments, if we could have quite a short session in which you might like to address your questions to Nira, which would engage with the issues which Anne has raised and with matters which we know are dealt with in the book. So if there are a few questions, then perhaps we can take them now.
I think they
No,
want to
people,
do,
you've...
They
okay.
want to.
There's one over there. It's Nadja. Nadja wants to do
Just a sec. Sorry, Nadja, just a second. The microphone's just arrived here, if that's okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for this conversation and the whole day, which was really brilliant and stimulating. I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but in terms of intersectionality and this really important work, I was just sort of wanting to note the need to also engage with critical literature around disability and looking at disability as a political force of exclusion, inclusion, belonging, and that being sort of a very main area around which people can still be segregated and that is seen as justified within the political discourse.
Absolutely. My friend Helen Mikosha from Australia has been working on it, and we've been cooperating on this issue. When I worked on issues of women's citizenship and difference, she was a major participant in the dialogue there. And also, when I was in a panel of intersectionality with Kimberly Gramshaw and others in the American Sociological Association, because of her involvement in this, she was also on that panel, and absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah.
Thanks. Nadja.
Yeah. So I haven't read the book, but I just got it. And so I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you already started to speak about in terms of the feminist ethics of care, because we've had, a long time ago, we had conversations about it in terms of also political practice and the fact that one reason some right-wing fundamentalist movements are doing so well is because somehow they get the care thing right. And also the failure of the women's movement, of the feminist movement, to actually sustain what I think you were describing at some point in the past was much better practice. I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit on this and maybe also suggest some ideas. How can we better feminist carers take care of each other?
First of all, I want to start by recommending Alison Assiter's most recent book, which is all about that. But secondly, I want to say that my discussion about care and ethic of care very much look at the two major feminist models of ethics of care. One which I really reject, which is the one by Sarah Ruddick and Virginia Held and so on, which built the ethics of care around the maternal model, which and I suppose Levinas comes into that as well, which is we need, it's kind of an asymmetrical one, which we need to care the helpless, the ill, the children, the elderly, and so on. And because women, whether inherently or because of their socialization, are brought up to be the carers, they are, in this sense, more more ethical. It's kind of a development of Gilligan's kind of two different types of ethics. The other one, which John Tronto mostly kind of developed, and I think also Alison, is basically is much more linked to notion of kind of citizenship, in the sense that each of us, in shorter or longer periods of our lives, need care, are vulnerable and needy. And this whole notion of autonomy of the individual, on which neoliberalism or liberalism is constructed, is a complete fiction. And in a way, the caring work of women have facilitated and oiled this kind of working in society, and therefore, care is an absolute and inevitable dimension of social, economic, and political life, and we need to engage in it. And the feminist ethic of care is not so much about the boundaries of belonging, but how do we need, in terms of ethics, how do we need to relate to each other? What does it mean that we belong to each other? The other element which is very important, and this is part of the reason of rejection of the first model, is that you cannot cleanse the notion of caring from the notion of power. Because in different circumstances, both big, and just this week we had this report about the caring of the elderly in Britain, how abusive it can be, and therefore the power of the carers, and in other situations also because of the power of the victim of the cared, is influential. And in the book I kind of quote Martin Luther King Jr., who talked about the insufficiency of love without power and power without love. And in this sense, this whole book, as I said at the beginning, is about the intersection of sociology of power with the sociology of emotion. And I think this is what I want to say now, and the rest we can discuss after opportunity to read. Yeah.
Are there any other pressing questions? Okay, right. Well, in that case, first of all, I want to thank Anne very much, and of course Nira, for this last session. I would just like to make a couple of observations. First of all, that this has clearly been a very fine day's discussion, and quite unusual, I think. I mean, I've been to events which have launched a Festschrift in the form of a book, where there's sometimes been a panel and an introduction or a conversation, or specific meetings which recognise a scholarly or activist or other contribution. But I don't think I've ever been to a day quite like this. And I think it's very eloquent expression of people's appreciation of Nira's work over the years and her direct engagement with them as a scholar, a supervisor, a friend. And it's so in that sense, it's really been an extremely positive and notable experience. I just would like, as I happen to be in the chair in this final formal session, to very much thank the organisers of this event, and that's Molly Andrews and Corinne Squire.
Can I please thank you all for this wonderful
and to thank, excuse me, and to thank Masih Fathi, without whom this event could not have taken place.
And to them who organized this wonderful and designed this beautiful poster, and also took lots of pictures, as well as helped to organize, and all the other, from Celine to Nicola to Mary to all the others who have been helping today. I've been so moved and so grateful, and I think I'm very, very lucky to have you all. Thank you.
Okay, now, somebody, I'm not quite sure if Alain has had a mention yet, but here he is.
He has.
And he has. Well, I'm very pleased. That's excellent. Okay, so now the more formal part of the proceedings of the day have come to an end, and everybody's invited to step outside into the sort of foyer area where you will be able to get your hands on the book. And there will be a wine reception, and one of our colleagues, Alison Asseter, is going to briefly address us. So if everyone would like to, as a body, to go outside, and we will continue there. Thank you.